Greetings, green ones. My name is Jess. It is fall. It's time for our fall succession planting to have winter vegetables. And today I'm going to walk you through my process of prepping and then planting for winter harvest. I live in Zone 8B in the Pacific Northwest, and we are super fortunate to have a very mild climate here that allows for year-round gardening. And essentially, it will only snow once or twice in the depths of winter typically. So I am able to plant vegetables that a lot of people would only do as their fall vegetables through the whole winter. And I'm going to give you tips and tricks that are specific to this zone that I'm in, as well as just general suggestions for your own succession planting wherever you're living in the north. One thing that is affecting everyone right now, regardless of where you live, is climate change. Last year, it was summer, 80 degrees here in Seattle, hot, not raining, drought season, all the way through the middle of October. This year, it is the beginning of October right now, and we've got our cool weather. We've had 2 weeks of rain on schedule, essentially, since the fall equinox back at the end of September, and I am not taking it for granted. I am so grateful that the season has changed on time. But in general, as we continue into the climate crisis and the weather and the climate become more and more erratic year after year, it becomes harder to rely on what you've done in the past in your garden, or if you're a new gardener, on other people's guides and recommendations in terms of what times of year you're supposed to be doing what. Just as an example, if it was still 80 degrees and drought season like it was last year right now, I would be waiting to plant these, even though all of my guides for this zone are going to say that you could start planting this at the end of September and should be, finished by the time you're, halfway into October. So pay attention what is actually happening in your garden and take that into account, as well as the suggestions that you're going to read online that are sort of generalizing about the zone that you live in. The first thing that I'm going to do today is I'm going to prep the garden area that I am working in. I grow food in lots of different areas around my yard, but we're just going to be focusing on this raised bed area that I grow a lot of herbs in, but also do rotate through quite a few different vegetables. This raised bed area, I didn't put it in, it was here when we moved in. We live at a house that we also work at, our gardening company, me and my partner. So when we came in, there was already this raised bed area, but there was absolutely nothing growing there other than one rosemary plant, and the dirt level was at the bottom. And since then, we've had a lot of practice growing stuff in there, and it is unfortunately one of the shadier areas in my yard. So I can't necessarily just grow whatever I want there. I have to keep into account the shade and keep into account the microclimates that exist within the raised beds, because basically the light hits them differently. And if this is your first year gardening in a new space, or just your first year gardening in general, you really want to take the time to observe as much as you can how the light affects your garden, how the sun is moving, how the light is different at different times of the year. And if it's your first year doing a fall planting for winter harvest, don't be too hard on yourself if some of it doesn't work out. You're going to learn a lot. Gardening is a trial and error process. Some of us are further along in our trials than others, but we're all still learning, and I'm excited to do some learning with you today. So I'm going to prep the raised beds area, and basically that is going to involve taking out plants that I want to remove to make room for more plants, which can always be a little bit emotional for me. When you get a plant to grow, taking it out before it's like completely ready to die can be kind of hard, a hard decision to make. But with succession planting, the whole point is that you're trying to maximize your space and always have more things growing. So you kind of do have to be a little ruthless and take some stuff out. Yeah, let's prep the beds. I'm just going to clean up to do some composting of some of the dead plants, as well as clean up this big mess I made out of a bunch of sunchokes that I impulsively and sillily cut down. They were blocking the light in the beds, and I was worried about the plants that I had, especially like my artichokes, my rhubarb, my perennials that I want to get really big. So I kind of just like hacked away at a bunch of these sunchokes, and that was a stupid thing to do because sunchokes, basically when you cut them, it sends more energy down to the tubers, which causes them to create more tubers. And if you've ever grown sunchokes, they are aggressively, what's the word? We really don't like to use the word invasive here at the Garden Dawn because invasive and weeds is all a matter of perspective, but let's just say sunchokes are aggressively prolific and have a tendency to branch off and end up in places that you didn't expect. So I probably shouldn't have cut down most of the sunchokes before they were done flowering because it's probably just going to create more sunchokes underground for me to deal with later, but that is a problem for another day. My problem for today is getting everything cleaned up and prepped so that we can plant. Something I wanted to mention really quick is that there's often a misconception around the concept of cleaning up literally like anything in gardening. If you don't have a compost bin to put the dead plants into, plants that you're removing, then what I would recommend is that you find a bed that has plants that are perennial or plants that you've already planted that you're not taking out anytime soon. Take a pair of pruners and basically chop up the dead plant matter into smaller pieces and lay them down as a green mulch around your other plants. You do not ever want to take the dead plants and the plants that are still alive that you're taking out from around your garden and just put them into the city compost. You're removing nitrogen and nutrients from your soil and giving it away, and you're gonna have to buy that back in the form of compost, fertilizers, etc. So if you don't have a compost bin, I highly suggest the chop and drop method. It's gonna allow the dead matter, the organic matter, to absorb back into your soil, and it's going to, woo, the sun just came out. It's gonna save you money as well as create a more healthy soil biome that's going to support all of your plants better, and it's gonna help with water retention because we love a good mulch for that too. You don't want the soil to be bare even underneath the plants. It's better to have rough organic matter, dead stuff on top of it so that it can help keep the water in. Or if you live in a very floody area, which sometimes in the Pacific Northwest it can be like that in the winter, then to keep the water from turning into a giant mud thing, because it also absorbs the water and keeps it from, you know, turning into a mud moment. Concept of waste is kind of funny because you never want to waste your waste. Your waste is really your gold. One man's trash is another man's treasure, and one person's garden waste is my garden gold. So that's my first tip for you. And one more thing, if you don't have a compost bin, it better be because you don't have room for it and not because you think it's too hard to build one or too expensive. We built our compost bins out of wood pallets. They are untreated. You got to make sure they're untreated or it's going to be leaching bad things into your chemicals, into your compost. But we got these untreated wood pallets for free, and these are literally just nailed together. We actually need to finish doing it on this one, but we basically put chicken wire on the inside, which keeps the organic matter from slipping through the cracks. And then we're literally just using big pieces of cardboard with some really heavy rocks on top of it as the lid. Me and my partner Anders have our own gardening company, and obviously when clients pay us to make compost bins for them, we can make them way nicer than this, but we didn't want to spend money on compost bins when we already had these pallets and we needed them as soon as possible. So we just did the easiest, cheapest thing. It's also just kind of a part of our upcycling everything around us ethos. It's super zero waste. So yeah, if you don't have a compost bin, make one out of wood pallets. And if you make multiple bays, you don't even have to turn the compost. You could turn it like once a year. You could just leave it in there and it will decompose pretty much by its own if the turning is too much work for you. The most important thing for growing plants and for having a green thumb is having good quality organic soil with a whole lot of microbes in there that are what makes soil living. And living soil is a night and day difference for supporting plants' growth. The cheapest and the best way to get living soil is to make it yourself in a compost bin. Pro tip here, when you are removing plants, you do not want to just pull it out of the ground unless it's a root plant that you're trying to, harvest the root for. You want to take your pruners and cut it as close to the ground as possible, and then just plant around that root or that whatever little tiny bit is sticking up. And the reason why you want to do that is because when you leave the root in there, it will slowly decay, adding more nutrients to the soil. And as it decays, it leaves this line open into the soil for water and nutrients to soak in. So roots from dead plants are like the straws of the soil that allow it to just suck up all kinds of good stuff. And back on the topic of living soil, it's super important to have your soil be aerated, have your soil have stuff decaying in it, for all those yummy little things to be eaten on. Yeah, one really good way to keep your soil well aerated and to have water be able to soak in there deep and not hang out on the surface of it is to leave roots in to decay. This is a part of the greater no-till method approach. Your soil is your first little baby in the garden, and you want to take care of it, and you got to prioritize it even over your plants, because the soil is what is supporting the plants. I wanted to clarify that when you're cleaning up your garden and taking out plants, there's really two types of plants. There's plants that spread through their roots, rhizomal plants, that in order to remove them, you do actually need to take up the root. Technically there's three. There's root vegetables where you got to take out the root to harvest them, and then there's every other plant that's spreading through seed. And essentially, if the plant isn't a root vegetable or rhizomal and you're trying to remove it, then you're just gonna cut it right above the root at the flush with the ground so that the root can rot and it can help the soil, blah, blah, blah. But if it's rhizomal, you're gonna want to actually pull it out like mint, otherwise it's going to keep spreading or the sun chokes. And if you're doing that and you're worried that your compost isn't hot enough to keep them from basically sprouting in the compost and spreading more and taking over your compost, you can put them into a 5-gallon bucket or into like a pile on top of concrete somewhere or something like that if you don't have a 5-gallon bucket. But I think every gardener should have a stash of 5-gallon buckets. They're so helpful. Put them in a 5-gallon bucket and set them outside, let them get rained on, and wait until they turn brown and are basically starting to rot before putting them in your compost. And that will make sure that there is no way that they are going to come back alive again and spread, which would be bad. So just wanted to throw that in there for clarity. Another little tip for you here when you're taking out dead plants is you're gonna find some that still have the seed pods on them, like this guy, which is, I believe, cilantro. It's definitely in the carrot family, the Apiaceae family, formerly known as the umbellifer family, because you can see it has this umbellifer shaped floret at the top. So I know this is probably cilantro. It might be another carrot family member that I planted, but either way, I practice polyculture, which basically means growing a ton of different plants in the same area, which is a lot more to wrap your head around, but it's a lot better for the plants. Biodiversity is the insurance policy of the earth, basically. And when you grow a whole bunch of different plants together, they all end up being companion plants for each other. They feed the soil differently, which feeds all of them differently. They help protect each other from diseases, all that good stuff. So when you find a plant that you want to grow more of that has seed heads still, you could save the seeds. I could put this in a little Ziploc bag. Or what I'm gonna do today is I'm just going to grab the seed pod, kind of crumble it around, loosen it up, and cast it around in this area. It might grow more carrots, it might not. I don't really care. That was just some free seeds that I just used. This works really well with lettuce. Lettuce tends to leave a lot of seed pods. And you'll find some other ones, like I even have some artichoke seed pods on the top of the little thistle that I'm about to pull out. So check out these dudes right here. Before I cut this down, ah, this is so cool. These little thistle dudes. You can see that is the seeds there. I'm gonna save some of these because I would love to grow some more artichokes from seed next year. I love artichokes. Yeah, also just taking a minute to kind of look at the plants that you're pulling out before you do can be really educational. Just being like, oh yeah, this artichoke, it's a thistle plant. It's got these cool hairs, which is how it disperses the seeds. And whee! Just flinging these around a little bit too. It's pretty cool. Good morning, it is the next day. I didn't finish the cleanup until it was almost dark last night, so that's part of why I'm splitting this up into 2 days, but also because even just coming back into the garden today, seeing everything as a blank slate after I cleaned up yesterday, I just have fresh ideas and a fresh perspective after sleeping on it and looking at it with new eyes. So obviously you could do all of this in one day, but I like to kind of break it up, and I highly recommend sitting in your garden with a notebook and maybe a beverage. Maybe spend like a half an hour to an hour just like meditating on what's going on in here. I like to draw the layout of the garden, draw what is already in the beds, and then just start thinking about where everything can go. And also in beds where it's pretty crowded, I'm going to do ryegrass and Dutch clover and crimson clover as a cover crop. I did that last year and it works really well. It helps build the soil in terms of fixing the nitrogen and pulling up more nutrients, but it also helps build the soil in the sense that you can chop it into a green mulch multiple times. The ryegrass also, my dogs love to eat it and it's really good for them, so I'm a big fan of that. I don't want to see any bare ground in my garden when I'm done planting. Like right now, it looks like a blank slate and that's super exciting, but I don't want to see any bare dirt. I don't want to see any bare ground. Everything should either have a winter crop planted in it or a cover crop, or it should have a ton of mulch under it, like if it's underneath a plant or something like that. I also ultimately see my garden as an experiment, so I'll make choices about things to plant that I know are gonna work, but I also like to always play around with a couple things that I don't know if they're gonna work or not, but I suspect that they might, or I'm interested to see the results. Just learn more about what works and what doesn't work in your garden.
Hey babies, hello!
I completely forgot to mention lettuce. I use lettuce as a cover crop, and my only recommendation is that you get a couple different kinds of lettuce for more biodiversity and also more diversity in your diet, and it looks prettier. I usually like to do a combination of like mesclun greens, oak leaf lettuce, purple lettuce, butter leaf lettuce, all the lettuce, all the lettuce. All right, let's get to planting. Okay, so we've cleaned up our beds. We have a plan for what we want to plant, and I already know because I am a seed hoarder. I spend quite a bit of money on seeds. I collect seeds. People give me seeds. That I have seeds for every single thing that I decided to plant. But if you are not there yet, then you need to maybe go buy the seeds for what you want to plant, or you might need to, before you plan what you're going to plant, go look at your seeds and double check what you have and don't have. What I'm going to do, since I have more than enough seeds for what I'm trying to plant, is I'm going to go to my giant bin of seeds and I'm going to pull out multiple varieties of each thing: cabbage, broccoli, cauliflower, kale and chard, mustard greens, lettuce varieties, peas, garlic, onions, and cover crops, and basically make myself up a packet, a stash of all the seeds I'm going to use to plant this specifically, and then I'll be able to plant it away. So we'll see. I'm planning on doing this today, but I also might look at the weather and find out when the next rainy day is and do it the day before that, because I think it's going to be hot through the weekend, which is not a good time to plant. I don't want to water right before planting. That just doesn't really make any sense. So it's really good to, have your plan though and be organized. And I'm going to also upload this into the digital design archive that I have, so that it's all stored away. So got plenty of work today to do regardless. Good morning. Since we last spoke, it's been a couple days of extremely heavy rain, which is amazing. If you can find a day that is either right before it's going to rain or right after it's going to rain or in between a bunch of rain, that is a great time to plant. And I'm glad I waited, because it is an absolutely glorious fall day today. So just a couple of things. First of all, I bought my ryegrass and my crimson clover cover crop. I already had some of my Dutch clover cover crop seed from last year. I went through my seeds and pulled out a whole bunch of different varieties for what I want to plant, but it felt like there wasn't as many seeds as I expected. And I was like, oh, have I gone through a lot more seeds this year than I thought? And then I realized that I had already made a little packet of seeds to plant in October, and I just forgot about it. So this is something that you can do one season ahead. You could do it for the entire year. Essentially, you can go through your seed stash and make little packets of what you need to plant, write a little note about when you're going to plant it, and take out some of that work for yourself. And then try not to forget that you already did that work like me. Okay, and now you're organized. I've got my site map saying what I'm going to plant where. I've got my seeds. I've got my coffee. It's time to do the dang thing and get to planting. Alrighty, we are all planted up. As you can see, it takes a lot longer to prep to plant than actually planting. Actually planting, that was maybe like 20-25 minutes. All of the prepping and planning was like, a full day's work. I think the hardest part about succession planting is just wrapping your head around what you're going to do and having a plan. I hope that I inspired you to be a little bit more confident in your next succession plan iteration. And I created a couple resources for you that I'll put on the screen now, but that also are going to be in the blog link that goes with this post. They're free, link in the description. Essentially, I have a little graphic on the basics of building a polyculture guild for your vegetable garden. So if you're having a hard time thinking about what to grow together, this can be really helpful. It is a little bit more oriented toward warm season crops, but at the end of the day, with the whole polyculture situation, most plants work well together and work better together than when you monocrop them. In the traditional gardening way, you do the rows, they're all equally spaced apart, and you do one plant in there, and it's just leaving that plant quite a bit more vulnerable. Even though you can grow more for the amount of space, you're going to have more problems with pests and other issues. So, and the plants just aren't going to grow as healthy. So especially if you want to do more low maintenance gardening and you also want your vegetable garden to be beautiful, I really recommend the polyculture strategy. I also have a little calendar map of the succession planting general year-long schedule in Zone 8B. When I was first getting into succession planting, the hardest part for me was taking the disparate information about each plant and when to plant it and putting it into a bigger picture about what I need to be doing year round. So I tried to notice patterns and put those into something that will be a little bit easier to digest. So that schedule is hopefully helpful. Again, like I said at the beginning of the video, with climate change, you can't necessarily just rely completely on those date ranges, but that will give you a good general idea of kind of what goes after what. And you'll see that essentially there are different sized gaps between the plants that you can fill with other plants. So my other graphic essentially goes over if you were doing a bed rotation of succession planted crops year round, what you could do with I think every third year being a cover crop to give the bed a chance to regenerate a little bit. So I hope that you check those out. I hope those are interesting to you. And thank you so much for being here. We love sharing with the PlanterNet. And if you live in Seattle, our gardening company also services gardens all over Seattle. We create the permaculture dream gardens of the Pacific Northwest for our clients and then share with the digital realm and the larger international plant community on here. So I would love to hear in the comments if you have any questions, what you're succession planting right now. If you notice anything that I'm doing where you're like, I feel like you could do this a better way. I am not an expert. I am a enthusiast who uses a lot of trial and error to keep having fun exploring, growing plants and growing my own food. So give us a little subscribe if you want more and if you want the update on how everything's gonna look in the winter. I now need to repeat this process on the rest of my garden, which is about 3 times the size of what we just did. So, you know, there's always more work to do in the garden. That is one thing that never changes and will always be learning and growing right along with the plants. Thank you for being here to do that with me, and I will see you in a new video very soon.